This is James Lupton. Welcome to another episode of the Fighter Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined with Ray Leonard Jr. It won't take a genius to know who today's episode is about. Your father, Sugar Ray Leonard. Ray, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, James.
No problems at all. Thank you for joining me. As I mentioned, we're talking today about your father. So let's start with your earliest memory of your dad and your dad's career.
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. My parents were teenagers when I was born. My mother was 15, my father was 16 years old. So we were born into a space of no means. It was a tough. My mother was on welfare until my father you know miraculously made it to the 1976 Olympics and got a little bit of notoriety. But the thing people don't know is like you win a gold medal, but you still don't have any money. Like you come back home as a sweetheart, and we're still living in the same place and circumstances that we were. But now, once my father turns professional and starts to get some notoriety, we come from a space of really not, knowing anything outside of our block in Palmer Park, Maryland, to being broadcast to the world. So we have to figure out as a young family, how do we, go with what was uniquely positioned at the time as the brand of Sugar Ray Leonard to get out to the world and be able to speak to people in a way that we were a marketable family. So you may not know that my father was he didn't sign with Don King, he didn't sign with Bob Arum, he didn't sign one of the big promoters. They gave him bag loads of cash, but he invested in himself and had 30 investors put up $1,000 each to have the brand of Sugar Ray Leonard and have the company of Sugar Ray Leonard be the guiding force. And after his first fight, he paid everybody back with interest and was a free agent. So he didn't have to have a promoter throughout his career. And we still own, fight footage and everything else. So it was a unique business model for a kid that young to be able to take a chance on themselves. And so shout out to Mike Trainer, his attorney, and the people that were around that had a different business model in hand that let us not be what 99% of the boxers nowadays are and end up without some financial means.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there, a business head, a true entrepreneur at a very young age. I think the Olympics, he was about 18, I think. And then, like you say, he turned professional after that. And he's still, like I say, got his assets. So he's still maintained that business mindset throughout his life, really. Because, like I say, it's from a young age there. And it's not what many 18-year-olds would do. They will go out party and enjoy their teen life and their early 20s and early adulthood life, but not your father. For yourself, you mentioned he he won a gold medal. He went back home. He still lived in the same place. It's still the same environment you was in. Was there a point in your life where you realised a change and realised a bit of wealth?
Yes, yes, and it was overwhelming because we got an offer to do a commercial because a part of the marketing plan. So even from the beginning, it was to create the wholesome family model to what was not seen from an African American family in the states or anywhere. That was a person that was open to being commercially successful. So everything that we did was diligent, and everything that we did was intentional. So from that 7 Up commercial that I did when I was, I think, 7 or 8 years old, became one of the top commercials of all time. ESPN ranked as I think the 20th best sports commercial of all time. So when that happened, we went from being okay here, our neighborhood knows us, but then it turned into a whole thing that the world knows us because this commercial ran for probably 15 years. They got everything they could out of it. And I saw it as we moved from Palmer Park, Maryland to an apartment in Largo, Maryland to a bigger apartment, then to a house with a pool shaped like a boxing glove. And so I say, oh yeah, things are changing.
Absolutely. And I've got it here. So,
There it is. There it is. That commercial. I still have that in my head. They say, hey, is that the champ? I say, nah, that's just my dad.
That's a very good point you made. One of the questions I'm going to come on to later on was the difference between Sugar Ray Leonard, the fighter, the promoter, the analyst, to Ray Leonard, the father. What was the difference between what I would have seen compared to what you see?
Yeah, so there's two different people. Basically, it's almost like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that you have to be to be a fighter. You have to get into your head. I boxed for a little bit, and then I got into playing American football and running track and field because I didn't like getting punched in the face. But to have that mentality to go in there and know that you can't call timeout. You don't have help from anybody else. Your performance, even on the nights that you don't feel your best, you have to go perform. So you have to turn yourself into a person or a mindset that you're willing to compete no matter what's going on. And my father was so diligent as a strategist. He would watch film of everybody. He wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the fastest all the time, but he was the most prepared. And he was skilled because you call boxing the sweet science for a reason. Like it's to hit and not be hit. And so that was his strategy, to be the most prepared person uh, ever when he went to any battle, so he could fight standing toe to toe if he had to. He could fight, boxing, moving. So it was a difference between when he came home. He was a shy guy. I mean, Ray Leonard was a shy person, didn't really speak a whole lot. But when you turn the lights on the stage, he's a flashy, flamboyant guy that people love to hate. And so that I find that it's funny because most performers, and I think he's a performer. Most performers and exceptional artists, they'll get to that space where they have to separate who they are as in a day to day life and who they show to be when they're actually on stage.
You mentioned at home he was shy. He was, not his flamboyant character we saw on cameras. Was he happy as a fighter?
I think that was the place he was most happy because that was something he had done since he was a kid. I think it was a protection, space that his older brother Roger, my uncle, was a number two fighter in the world, and he unfortunately his career got derailed because he was into drugs. But he brought my father into the ring, and my father found a home in boxing and a voice that he didn't have as a young man or as a person. Even now to this day, he's not the greatest communicator internally, but when he's on the stage, he can communicate like no other and share the stories. So it's a dichotomy of who people are. Sometimes is you have to separate the star from the actual person.
With your dad seeing the downfall of your uncle, did that help him stay on a straight and narrow as such, or do you think it affected him deeper?
Yeah, I think it was one of the things that made him be able to rebound from his downfalls, from his things that he had to battle, was because he saw the toll it took on my uncle, and then my uncle was able to come back, not as a professional, but as a person. He was able to redeem himself and find solace and be sober for over 30 years now for my uncle. But for my father, it was a battle that he was hiding his struggles of dealing with drug and alcohol abuse. Um, you know, after the boxing was taken away from him. So once he had the detached retina in '82, he went into a phase where he was trying to still get the glitz and glamour and roar the crowd, but he couldn't fight because he had a detached retina at that time. But then when he was able to come back and fight Marvin Hagler and have some of these great fights, the third Duran fight, the second Thomas Hearns fight, it was kind of a different phase for him to be able to do that because when he was competing, he would never touch any substance, and so when everything shut down and when the lights dimmed, it was tough for him to face some of the demons that he had. but he overcame it because he had that discipline. He had that structure in his life that he, knew that he, the biggest fight of his life was going to be overcoming, his addictions.
You mentioned in the ring and fighting, he was at his happiest. You've touched on there when he was forced into his retirement due to the detached retina. He fell into addiction. He slipped and battled demons. How aware of this were you at the time?
Oh, I was very aware. I mean, you think I'm only, a 15, 16-year difference from my parents. So I grew up and learned with them. And I was the eldest, and I was the kid that was put out to the forefront. So when struggles happened, I had to go out on a rough night with the family, or a rough night with my father, or something happened. The next day, we had to smile to the camera and show that face that that everybody expected. So I was very, very aware, and it affected me, long term into my life, about how I move forward and how I raise my family. So it gave me, I guess an aversion to some of the things that my father and my mother had to deal with.
On the flip side, you mentioned how you had to deal with his demons and seeing him go through his struggles and his troubles. For yourself, how did you deal with the media, the marketing, the commercials? How did you deal with all the hype from a young age?
Well, I guess thankfully it wasn't the internet age where everything that happened like right away was instantly posted. There was a runway of stories that we could head off, kind of ahead of time. But it was different. I thought everybody was going through this, but then I talked to my friends and they're like, no, like people don't mob us at the at the airport, or people don't mob us when we go to the mall, or when we're in a casino in Las Vegas, and thousands of people just start to crowd you immediately. I had to have a bodyguard who was 6'5", 300 pounds, sitting outside of my classroom in middle school, up through high school. So I had Secret Service detailed at a time when I had kidnapping threats. There were so many different things that I thought was just like the normal thing that everybody had to go through, that I learned later on in life that no, it was just me. People are hopping over our fence. Like you had to, rabbit fans that were, sending letters to the house. I mean, it's the most insane story in the world. Like now that I'm old enough and I look back at it and I have kids myself, to 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 understand it, and I can't wait for the movie to actually come out one
Absolutely.
day.
Absolutely. You mentioned obviously your father came back and he fought Hagler, Duran 3, Hearns 2. Just talking about the Four Kings. How important were the Four Kings to your father?
I think it was what made all of them. The fact that they had a rivalry of people from different weight divisions that were not scared to fight each other, because it was about who was proving who was the best. They wanted to be undisputed champion. They weren't 20 belts. They were 3 belts, maybe, in each division. And they were willing to go up and fight from lightweight to welterweight to middleweight to junior middleweight, super middleweight, all those to light heavyweight to go up and prove that they were the best. And I think you won't ever have a golden era like that again. With those kind of guys. I mean, Thomas Hearns, Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran, Wilfredo Benitez. I mean, those are just, you talk about the Four Kings, but that, I mean, the fringe guys that were super, super talented that they had to fight, and they all fought each other. So it was super important. And when Showtime did the film The Kings, the documentary just recently, like you see some of the background of all the political things and everything that tied into it. It was just really amazing to be a part of, and I was at every single fight ringside, and still friends with the kids of the other Kings, because I was the oldest. I mean, I'm still the oldest. And I was kind of like their beacon, the person that they looked up to and still look up to as an entrepreneur, as a business person, and as kind of the guy that went through most of it.
Fantastic. You mentioned obviously after your father battled his demons, obviously he went back into the ring. But after he did retire from his fighting days, he went on and he had his own promotional company. He obviously worked on TV doing his punditry and his analysis, and he hosted the Contender Series, which I've got to say that's what got me into boxing. The first series of that with your dad hosting Sergio Mora. That's why I'm here watching boxing and a boxing fan today. What was that like for you to see your dad continue to flourish after hanging his gloves up?
It's bittersweet because he always had this dream of doing a national or global kind of a travel tour to go to all the different countries and share the background of boxing, not just the sport, but the sacrifices that people go through to be able to fight. Because when you talk about boxing, you can't play boxing, and the Contender was amazing because you got to see some of the background of all the things that these kids had to go through to get to that one opportunity. You don't have a lot of boxers that come from, well-to-do families, and they're basically fighting for their lives, and they have so much on the line when they go in there. And so I thought the Contender was an amazing series. I would love to see it continue because I think those are stories that need to be told. And for him, it was important to not just be uh, an athlete, but to be a businessman, to be a role model, to be a person that is respected, because it's part of the things that when you tell him he can't do something, he's going to prove you wrong. And so I think that's in our DNA. Why I started my company, what I'm doing now, I just want to continue the legacy as we grow.
You mentioned also you've got your own company, you're an entrepreneur yourself. Is there any advice from your dad's fighting days that you've taken on board in your day-to-day life now?
Yeah, it's boxing. The whole sport of boxing of not being afraid, having no fear, to strategically put your game plan together as you go. That's everything in business. What I do with my companies is make sure that I'm preparing beforehand. And then when you go to market, you go to market with that uncontrollable enthusiasm of what you're doing. But you also know that you train to a certain point that you can prepare for anything that hits you. And each round you might get knocked down, or you may have a stumble, but you get back up the next round, you go back out, and you keep fighting, and you show heart in every single thing that you do, because that was one of the major things that my father always did, and everything that he does in business and fighting and strategy, everything with his philanthropy in life, is he shows heart, and his heart was bigger than most, and so that will pull him through a lot of situations, from his alcohol and drug abuse to his uh, fighting days to his days as a business person. Is showing that heart to say, okay, here, I'm going to get up and I'm going to be disciplined, and I'm going to be more prepared, and I'm going to be a person that shows up every single day better than anybody else.
So I'll touch on something you mentioned earlier in the call. You briefly boxed yourself. Now, a lot of fighters, they know what boxing does. They know how dangerous it is. Like you mentioned, it's not a game. Now, did your dad want you to fight?
It was never any pressure from him. That was the one thing. It was never any pressure for him. It was more so from everybody else on the outside that wanted me to fight. And I guess for me, I wanted to prove that I could fight. I wanted to prove that I was a fighter. Um, I never wanted to be in his shadow. So I guess that's probably why I was so adamant about taking a different path, because I knew I could never be six-time world champion in five different weight divisions and Olympic gold medalist, but I could be great in my own space. So that's one of the biggest things that he always kind of put towards me, is, and he encouraged me to be your own man and to be better than he is. And so, like, my motto, my tagline is know better, do better. And my grandfather told me that at a young age, and I know that my grandfather told my father that as well. So the progress of us is to try to be better than we were yesterday and continue to have progress. And if we do that, we can always be, ahead of the curve.
Just to go back on the Four Kings and the rivalry at the time, but now I speak regularly to Jackie Callan, and she tells me how your father gets on very well with Thomas Hearns these days. How nice is that for you to see? How nice is it for your dad to have of these friendships and these bonds now with guys that he went and fought?
It's a blessing. I mean, that they created history, from Tommy Hearns and Roberto Duran and Marvin Hagler, and they created a point in time that kind of time stood still for everybody to watch and just be in awe of their um, skill sets and their rivalries. And it looked like they were just the worst enemies at the time. But now to see each one of them, God bless, Marvin, rest in peace, Marvin Hagler, for to see the relationships that flourish. My father is friends with Tommy Hearns, with Roberto Duran. They all talk and they see each other at these events, and it's beautiful to see that you can be such fierce competitors, but also champions of each other, especially now later in your careers. And so I hope we continue this to continue to talk about them so they can continue to get their flowers and not be forgotten in this fast social media world.
Absolutely, they absolutely deserve that, and I can't see them being forgotten after what they've done in the sport. Now, finally, always finish on the same question on every episode. Tell me your favourite or your funniest stories about your father, away from the boxing ring, maybe.
Ah, oh, there are a bunch of funny stories.
Give us a couple of
Let
your
me
favourites.
Yeah, let me think about one that really stands out. Um, I guess one is the fact of him when he did Dancing with the Stars. That was hilarious to me to sit there and to be able to pick with him the whole time, because as beautiful as he was in the ring, to dance and move in the ring, he was a terrible dancer outside the ring. And so I knew when they called him to say, okay, here, we want you to be on Dance with the Stars, because they thought he could dance inside the ring, that he was not going to do well because he has two left feet when he's dancing. So I got to talk trash to him about his outfit, about his dancing, and unfortunately for him, he got kicked out pretty quickly in Dancing with the Stars. So you didn't have to see too much of that dancing for long.
It sounds like it's a good thing.
Yeah, it was definitely a good thing because it was going to get worse.
Fantastic. Well, Ray, I want to thank you very much. I appreciate your time. It's brilliant hearing stories about your dad, one of my favourite ever fighters. So thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely, James. We'll hope to see you over in the UK soon. Where we've been doing some tours there in the past few years. Haven't really been back since the pandemic, but looking forward to coming back over and hanging out. So we'll see you soon.